It's grades day here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stars and skulls on a lot of the Steelers players from that win at the Colts. Not a lot of super highs, but no super lows either. We'll talk about who went where. Also, credit to the offensive line. The Steelers, it's been a patchwork job, but they are improving, them and the backups who stepped up. Mike Tomlin had some interesting comments that we talk about today on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Josh Taylor of KDK TV and 93.7 The Fan here in Pittsburgh. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're covering your team every day. As I said before, we got Josh Taylor's back on the show. You know Josh, he's the man. He's always he knows everything that's going on in Pittsburgh and around the world in sports. Josh, how you doing?
I'm good. At the time we're recording this show, I just got done doing a Duquesne basketball game. Doing play-by-play for Duquesne UC Santa Barbara, which Duquesne won, by the way, 6-1. Which short little history lesson here. They already matched last year's win total. They won 6 games all last season, and this season they've already won 6 in November. So it's kind of fun to be a part of a team that's doing some stuff that's a little bit more noteworthy, other than being at the bottom end of the barrel, so to speak, from last season. So yeah, there's some promise going on in the Bluff. It's fun to be a part of it, and as an alum, it's like a dream job anyway. So I love it.
I hear that. It's great, but that's again why he's the man. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Let's keep talking though about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Josh, the Steelers' run game has come alive since the bye week, and for a while it was Najee Harris getting a lot of big plays. But you also saw Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland get their licks in. Jalen Warren's had some good moments. But usually when you're seeing all those guys play well, usually stacks up to the offensive line doing very well. And we're going to get into our grades later, where I put guys at stars and skulls and all those other things. But to me, a lot of this comes down to I think that they actually got it right when they signed Mason Cole at center. There were a lot of questions if he'd be able to do that. I talked to Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, and he was like, man, I don't know. That guy was inconsistent with his snapping. He's been pretty consistent, especially in I'd say the last month and a half to 2 months of play, and he's been a stabilizing presence on the Steelers' offensive line.
That was the first thing I was going to say, stabilizing presence. He seems like the one guy that if everything else is kind of falling apart around them, he seems to be the one thing that kind of holds it all together. Not to mention the fact that he's grown into a leadership role. He's been one of the more vocal guys in the locker room, especially among the offensive linemen, and I'm sure you can attest to that as much as anybody because you're in there pretty often. I think it comes back to the fact that, they went in with the game plan in the offseason of bringing in veteran guys. They didn't want to just completely load up the offensive line with rookie talent, because they were thinking they probably had a chance to try to contend with what the pieces that they had in place, not expecting to have to, pull the ripcord on the Kenny Pickett experiment so early. But at the same time, bringing in veteran guys like a James Daniels and a Mason Cole, not only did you bring in a veteran presence or 2 veteran presence up front, you also brought in guys that kind of assumed leadership roles immediately, because Dan Moore is a younger guy. Okorafor, haven't been in the league a few years, is still relatively young. And I think that's something you have pointed out on my radio show before, how young Okorafor is. So, and then same thing with Kevin Dotson. He's relatively younger as far as experience. So they needed guys that could come in and really become, something stable or stabilizing in that regard. And Mason Cole has become that. And I think it's really important moving forward to do that, because a lot of people are questioning the need for changes on the offensive line. And I'm probably one of those people that thinks changes are necessary, but you don't want to completely, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You got to keep somebody in there that can keep things moving, so to speak, or kind of keep that ball rolling. And I think Mason Cole is one of those guys.
Absolutely. I think he is one of those guys. We got a chance to talk to Mike Tomlin during his Tuesday press conference. The first question from Buzz, that's his Buzzsaw's his nickname, but Chris
That's my
Adamski of
guy,
the
man.
Trip.
Love Chris.
Yeah, Chris is the man. But he had a good question about a lot of the backups who stepped up, like Benny Snell, like Anthony McFarland, but also like James Pierre. And again, we'll get to all their grades later. But he asked that question. And then I asked him what has gone into Mason Cole, what he appreciated the most about Mason Cole. Here was Mike Tomlin from his Tuesday press conference answering those questions.
Their attitudes, you can make the case that Pierre, Snell, McFarland were demoted or had lesser roles early this year than they had in the past. So they're all their work ethics and their mindset, and they've been buying in during the time.
I think we always acknowledge that roles never stay the same; they're ever changing, and so sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. This is football at its highest level. I think all guys know and understand that, and that's why they walk in the building with the spirit that they do every day. You got to earn it daily, and those guys continue to walk in with that spirit regardless of what the division of labor might be, because they need to be ready for their next opportunity.
Aside from, I think you used the phrase, the battlefield promotion that McFarland and Snell had, aside from that aspect, the actual running of the football, what did you like most about what those two guys did?
I thought they stayed within their skill set. Benny is a deliberate, one-cut downhill runner. Ant Mac is bursty and explosive, and good in space, and I just thought they leaned on their strengths.
Mike, what's been the biggest thing that you appreciated out of Mason Cole? He's a guy, this is his first year with the team. He's had multiple weeks where he started off kind of limited, but been able to step up for you guys in a big way.
Man, he's a sharp guy. He brings a can-do attitude. He's a winner in his approach to ball. He's a good communicator. His football intellect is really solid, and is helpful at that position in terms of the identification of protections and the picking up a blitz game.
Mike.
So going into that, those are all things. Being a sharp guy, being the person who can pick up those blitz calls, and something that I brought up too. Mason Cole started the week in a walking boot, and people were wondering if he'd be able to play. Mike Tomlin was like, "No, he'll play," and because he had done that multiple times this year, and he's absolutely right. There's times I've seen Mason Cole just on a walking boot. He comes out, limited participant early in the week. Turns himself into a full participant, and he's been an asset to the Steelers, and they found ways to win with him. I think that also losing him in the second half of the Bengals game was a bigger impact than a lot of people recognized, because J.C. Hassenauer missed several key blocks that could have sprung some bigger plays for the Steelers, and that's not the only reason they lost that game. But saying, Mason Cole being an asset there, I think, as much as Mason Cole deserves credit, I think Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach the Steelers hired, who a lot of people maligned before he even got a chance to do anything, I think he deserves credit for turning this group of, 2 4th-rounders on the left side, Mason Cole, James Daniels up the middle, and Chukwuma Okorafor on the right. He doesn't have a DeCastro or a Pouncey or even a Marcus Gilbert.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any of those type of guys to kind of say, hey, everyone, get behind this guy. He's going to set the tone for the game. And he's made this group a much better unit that's helping the Steelers win games late in the year.
Yeah, I'll start with a song reference. I'm usually good for one movie reference a show, but I'll start with a song reference. Don't always seem to go. You don't know what you got till it's gone. I mean, that's the case with Mason Cole. I don't think people really appreciated just what Mason Cole brought to that group until you didn't have him.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with it, not even necessarily great offensive linemen, just, good, serviceable, functional offensive linemen. When they're not in there and you're stuck with somebody else who may not have as much experience or did not have as much practice time, you're going to see a drop off. And it's hard to, try to reconcile that, because by then it's too late. And I think you're right. I think that second half of the Cincinnati game, you don't have Mason Cole in there. And we saw what the offense struggled with in the second half. And part of it was they weren't really consistently able to run the football and keep everything moving as far as helping out the passing game. Because I'm going to keep saying this, Chris. We've been saying this is the last season going into the offseason. This offense is not going to be able to function the way people want it to if the run game can't be consistent, because it has to set everything else up. And you saw in the second half against Cincinnati how it became a problem when they couldn't seem to get off the ground. And to your point about Pat Meyer, I think you're absolutely right. There was, I want to say maybe a few weeks back, might have been Mike Tomlin's press conference after the Saints game. So maybe it was 2 weeks ago. But Mike Tomlin was asked about the offensive line and how he's seen the growth, because he keeps talking about how he sees growth and development on that part of the team. And the one thing he talked about was how these guys are just, taking to double team blocks better, because there just hadn't been enough chemistry there. Actually, it might have been your question, come to think of it. But, there hadn't been a lot of
Way to
chemistry
remember.
there.
I appreciate when people remember which questions I asked to try to get. I
got you.
try to ask those film questions, man.
First of all, when I'm watching the Mike Tomlin press conference, it helps when you know the voices of all the people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm picking people out. Like, you played that clip. I'm like, yep, that's Chris Dempsey. Yep, that's Tim Benz. Oh, there's Carter. So like I listen for certain people. And I'm pretty sure it was one of your questions. And he talked about just the way that they're taking on double team blocks better. He was talking about James Daniels and Chukwuma and how they're starting to work together as far as feeling each other out and knowing when to make that move and when to come off that double team block and then get to the next level, because that's one of those elements of a zone blocking scheme. And if you're not well versed in it, you don't always catch on right away. And I don't think people really understand, the difference between gap and zone blocking when you're so well versed in one and then we have the other one thrust upon you. It's kind of an adjustment. It's like going from an iPhone to an Android or vice versa. You're used to one thing and then you got to learn something else. It kind of messes you up a bit. So you knew there was going to be a little bit of growing pains there and trying to figure out how they can better gel. But Mike Tomlin talked about how that development was coming a lot better. And there was one thing I noticed, not necessarily during the Buffalo game, but during the Tampa game, that you saw a little bit more of a push up front, because those first 4 or 5 games of the season, they call run plays and you'd see those guys getting pushed back, or you'd see 1 or 2 guys getting pushed back. I mean, even when a couple of guys got to push up front, you'd see 1 or 2 getting pushed backward. Now in these last 4 or 5 weeks, you're seeing guys collectively get a push. And that's one of those things where it may not happen overnight, but when it happens, you see it and you notice it. And that's one of the things that stuck out with me. And I agree with you. I think Pat Meyer should get some credit because he's not dealing with a high pedigree group. And I'm going to talk about a previous offensive line coach, and this might bother some people, but we always like to, we like to rewrite stories a lot. And this is nothing against Mike Munchak, because he was a fabulous coach and he was a Hall of Fame, type presence as far as coach and player. But Mike Munchak also had a couple of first round picks, a second rounder, and an undrafted free agent that the Steelers hit the lottery on in Ramon Foster. So he had that group and brought those guys in together, not to mention the fact they had a 6th round pick on the left side that they really, really nailed it with Kelvin Beachum too. So there was a lot of talent there that they got the most out of. Now, did Mike Munchak coach them up? Absolutely. But some of those guys walked in the door with pretty good ability. So like that marriage is what made it work. Pat Meyer doesn't have that kind of slate to work with. He's got a little bit of a different situation there talent-wise, but he's been able to get those guys to at least work together. And that in and of itself is a victory. I don't think people really realize just how important it is for all 5 men on that offensive line to be cohesive, because if one guy is off, the rest of it falls apart. So the fact that he's been able to get those guys on the same page, so you see that kind of development to where, Okorafor and James Daniels are working together tandem, as far as double team blocks in the zone blocking scheme or things of that nature, even just improvements in pass protection and knowing who's going to be where, or who needs to pick up this guy. All of that stuff is important, because if one thing goes wrong, all of it can fall apart. And we saw a lot of that in the first 4 or 5 games of the season, but not as much of it recently. I think Pat Meyer deserves credit for that.
Absolutely. We're going to get into grades in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, or the U.K. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits into your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll have to be able to find that Block Forever a podcast available as a bonus episode on Locked On NFL right now. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. He gives football fans an insider's look at the game through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities of all time. New episodes of Block Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football. Head over to Locked On NFL for a sneak peek of Block Forever, or catch the full series available anywhere to get you where you get your podcast. Audible, get in the game. And when we do back-to-back ad reads, we keep it rolling here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get to these grades. Now, as I always tell people who are new to the show, if you're not new, if you're a returning show, first of all, we thank you for being a returning show and riding with us, because we ride at dawn here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's go over our grading rubric. We don't do A, B, C's, and D's. We have our own rubric here. We have stars and skulls, kind of like the decals that you used to get on your helmet if you used to play football. Stars are good, skulls are bad. 1 star means you had a good play and a decent day. 2 stars means you had a great play with a good day to go behind it. 3 stars means you were an elite performer, all pro consideration for that game. Skulls, the same thing, just in the opposite direction. 1 skull means you had a bad play and didn't have a redeeming moment, or a kind of a bad game with a couple good plays. 2 skulls means you had a bad game as a whole. 3 skulls means you were all time terrible. And there is a bit of a curve here when we talk about this, because there's different expectations for different guys. And I said it to preface my first guy. We're going to go backwards here. Normally we lead with stars. We're going to lead with skulls today. We had 1 2-skull player. And Josh, I might be being a little harsh here, but my 2-skull player is Diontae Johnson. I felt his early start was really good. He caught 2 passes for first downs, but Josh, as the game continued, I thought he wasn't doing enough. I thought he dropped a touchdown that he had to haul in. And there was a beautifully schemed up play. And I know a lot of blame goes to Matt Canada for not making everything work all the time. But there was a beautifully schemed up play. It was 2nd and long for the Steelers. They needed to kind of, either get medium yards to get back to make it 3rd and manageable, or hit this play exactly as designed, and they could have scored a touchdown. And the design was there. It was a slant or a shallow crosser for Diontae Johnson against a soft zone. Pat Meyer, George Pickens, they set up blocks downfield that gave the lane for Diontae Johnson to run for a first down, maybe even a touchdown. And instead of taking that lane, he runs to the sideline and into a defender and ended up losing yards. And it was 3rd and 6. Now, thankfully for the Steelers, Kenny Pickett made it not matter by completing a pass to Pat Meyer on the next play. But it's those 2 moments, and I even feel like to myself I'm being a little harsh here. But I just look at me, Diontae, you ain't scored a touchdown. You got to get in there, man. You got to get it done. Josh, am I being too harsh here?
No, and especially given the fact that a lot of the criticism surrounding Diontae Johnson is not only because of his play on the field, it also is because this play on the field that we've seen this season comes after him signing the extension that he signed.
Huge contract.
To whom much is given, much is expected.
Yeah,
that's kind of how you look at it. And the more you laid it out, the more I kind of understood it. And you're right. When you have opportunities like that to make big plays or to score in a game where those opportunities may not come that easily, where they may come at a premium, you got to take advantage of them. And that's what elite players do. Elite players take advantage of those opportunities. And you mentioned the shallow crosser route. And I remember shaking my head thinking, what would Bill Walsh say if he saw a play like that? Because his theory was always timing plus space equals yak. Like that was kind of one of the premises that the West Coast offense was built upon. It's just, having the right timing, get a guy open in space. And even though it's a short pass play, if you get it to a guy in space, he can do the rest of the work for you and really help amplify that play and make it a lot more effective. And he missed opportunities to do that too. So I thought, wow, at first, but the more you laid it out, it made a lot of sense to me. And that's not often that you see a receiver of his caliber fail to make plays like that. I was saying this at halftime. I'm sitting there going, they have the lead that they do. This could be a 3-possession game. It could be a 20-point game. And I thought they missed out on an opportunity to win a game by multiple possessions instead of winning it by 1.
I agree. There were opportunities there, and I only do that because I think that Diontae Johnson can be a special wide receiver when he puts it all together, and he just hasn't put it together enough this year. But let's get to our 1-skull guys. Not a lot of them. When I was going back over the game, there were mistakes here and there, but my 1-skull guys, I gave Miles Jack, Dan Moore Jr., Kevin Dotson, Terrell Edmonds. Now, I give these guys on defense, Miles Jack and Terrell Edmonds, because Edmonds gave up a big pass play. He did have a sack, but I felt like Edmonds could have been a little bit sharper there. Miles Jack was getting picked on a bit in some of the coverage situations. Granted, I do think he could have been given a couple push-offs, offensive pass interference calls that weren't being given to them. But ultimately, that's where Matt Ryan was going when he was trying to get things going in the second half and had some success. I will say this though. We talk about Dan Moore Jr. and Kevin Dotson there. Kevin Dotson, I think, he had a couple bad moments, but he had some good moments as well. But I felt like his bad outweighed his good in the long run to almost neutralize his play. But there were just some whiffs that I thought were like a little too much. Dan Moore Jr., Josh, in the first two series, I was ready to give him 3 skulls. I thought he was done, toast. I'm like, this is ridiculous. He's not even usable. He's not even serviceable. This is terrible. The reason I dropped it to 1 skull was because, and almost neutralized it to just give him an even grade for the game, was because he blocked his butt off after that first quarter, and especially in the run game. Some of those biggest runs by Najee Harris and by Benny Snell and by Anthony McFarland were with him just collapsing his side of the line to the inside and opening up a path to those guys. I do feel like he responded well in the moment of adversity.
I thought he was going to be your 2 skull guy. I thought that's where you were going.
Again, I almost made him it, but I feel like as the second year, 4th round draft pick guy, he did step up with several key blocks as the game went on. I didn't wipe out all the bad that he did, but it did enough to say, all right, it wasn't your worst game. It was your worst start that I've ever seen in the first quarter, but he balanced it out with play throughout the rest of the game.
Yeah, I felt like he killed 2 drives single-handedly.
2 drives. I
one
agree.
With the penalty
I tweeted it. Yeah, I was like, this.
One with the penalty and one where there was just a string of plays where he just could not seem to get 2 hands on someone and keep them from moving forward. It was rough. It was really brutal. And I'll say this much, and it feels like, that left side between both him and Kevin Dotson. With Kevin Dotson, you mentioned that there were some good moments, but it does seem like for every one thing he does, there's almost like 2 things that he does to kind of cancel it out. Oh, it does feel like 1 step forward, 2 steps back with him. So, yeah, I agree with both of those as far as 1 skull guys. And Miles Jack, here's what makes it a little bit more curious with Miles Jack. They didn't have Robert Spillane.
Right.
And that's what makes this even more curious. Now, if you told me they didn't have Miles Jack and Robert Spillane was the guy that got picked on, I'm not as surprised. To see it be the other way around is what was surprising for me.
I hear you on that, but I want to point something else before we go to our stars in a minute here. You and I talked about all off season long and during the training camp about the offensive line, and we say, listen, this group does not have the star talent. Do not expect them to get better, but as they get better, it's going to be a roller coaster. There's going to be highs and there's going to be lows. And what are we talking about with Dan Moore Jr. and Kevin Dotson right now? Lots of highs, lots of lows, and trying to figure out the balance between them. There's not a steady one track of just success right now for those guys. And you know what? That's fine for young guys. They're finding their feet. They got to mature better if they want a long-term contract, but this is kind of the expectation when you have young offensive linemen who you haven't invested a whole lot into as far as draft capital or big money.
Yeah, it's not like we're talking about a David DeCastro or Marquise Pouncey who you use first-round picks or a second-rounder like Marcus Gilbert. You're talking about lower-round pick guys that, are going to need some polish. And this is the reason why certain guys are day 2 or early day 3 guys because, they still need some work. They've got a couple things, maybe some raw elements that are impressive that set them apart. But there are some of those finer points that they still need to perfect. And both of those guys have finer points that have not been perfected yet.
Absolutely. We'll get into our stars in just a minute here on our Locked On Steelers grade from the Steelers 24-17 win over the Indianapolis Colts. But first, we got to talk to you guys about LinkedIn. And of course, LinkedIn is the ultimate place that people go to when they're looking for jobs. So if you're looking for people to hire, best place to go for it as well is LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager on your small business. But you need to still find the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in, and they make it easier to find people that you want to talk to faster and for free. Just go to LinkedIn and create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Josh Taylor. We're getting to the stars segment here for the Steelers. And there's a lot of guys that fit into the stars. I will say that there were no 3-star players in this game in my book. There were guys who almost could have got there, but there were still some really good contributors. Let's start with the 1-stars because there's a lot of them here, Josh. I got Larry Ogunjobi, Cam Sutton, James Daniels, George Pickens, Cam Hayward, Kenny Pickett, Pat Fryermuth, Minka Fitzpatrick, Devin Bush, Presley Harvin, Arthur Mollett, Matthew Wright, Benny Snell, and Najee Harris. It's a lot of guys on this list. And granted, I might add some more retrospectively once because I like to watch games 4 or 5 times over. I've only had a chance to really watch it once and a half-ish right now because it was a short turnaround with Monday Night Football, and this is the Wednesday episode. But it's especially, going over some of these guys here. George Pickens had 2 drops, but he also had a spectacular catch down the sideline, a spectacular catch over the middle on a 3rd and long that the Steelers absolutely had to have, and he caught the 2-point conversion. So I was like, you know what? Those balance out. I think he still had a positive day. I almost gave Kenny Pickett 2 stars, but going back over the film and seeing some of the opportunities that he missed, I was like, you managed the game well, and you get a star for that. But if he had put that more touch on that pass to George Pickens in the end zone, Josh, he would have been a 2-star guy for me this game because then he would have thrown the touchdown and managed the game well on top of avoiding turnovers. But am I being too harsh on Kenny Pickett here, Josh? Should I have been giving him 2 stars?
No, I think if he completes that pass for a touchdown, then I think it pushes him over the edge. I think that was the one thing that was missing, honestly.
Yeah.
Everything else about that performance, 20 of 28, you're talking 70% completion percentage. It's hard to argue with that. With a rookie quarterback on the road in another primetime game that he's starting, because he's already started in one against Miami. Now he's getting another one on Monday Night Football. Completing 70% of your passes, not turning the ball over, and running the ball pretty effectively too. 6 carries for 32 yards?
Yeah.
He did just about everything you expect a young quarterback that has mobility to do. The only thing missing was, throwing that touchdown pass. He did throw the 2-point conversion, but, that touchdown pass, all he was missing was the accuracy.
Yeah.
If he puts that there, we're talking about Kenny Pickett having hands down the best game as a Pittsburgh Steeler and trying to figure out, okay, well, he's done these things, so what's next? And I think that's the consistency that you're looking for as far as the consistency in making those plays, doing those small things that lead to the bigger successes. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Other guys here on this list that I put down, Cam Sutton. Cam Sutton was only targeted 1 time the entire game. And that's impressive. And they moved him all over. And I talked about this last week. It needed to be important. The Steelers seem to have did what we talked about. They put Cam Sutton in the slot for a lot more passing downs while letting James Pierre and Levi Wallace work on the outside. We'll get to James Pierre in a minute. But I felt like Cam Sutton did his job on the inside. I felt Devin Bush, not a takeover game for him, but another really solid performance where he was up in the box, being physical, setting the tone, good hand usage, good explosiveness. I thought he contributed as well. Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, they've been consistent. I thought Arthur Mollett, he had a sack. He was allowed to be more of himself. He didn't have to go be the cover guy. He got to kind of be that downhill, a physical, aggressive guy. I thought he played well. Also, Minka Fitzpatrick was only targeted 1 time the entire game, I believe, and he also had what I thought was a huge tackle on a 3rd down to kind of keep keep the Colts in check. And again, my offensive lineman I put here. I put James Daniels as the guy here. I left Chukwuma Okorafor with an even grade because I felt like his pass protection was solid, but he could have been better and needed to be better in the run game, but it wasn't so egregious that I thought he deserved a skull. Just not too good enough to get a star. Is there anybody that I missed on this? I also, by the way, I put Pat Frymuth on the star list here. Is there anybody that I'm missing here that you feel was a 1-star candidate that I'm missing out on?
Not that I think that jumps off the page for me. I mean, I might see something later and maybe think it might be moved up or down, but that list is pretty solid. I mean, Arthur Mollett, he was really, really close to being a 2-star guy in my book. I thought Mollett played a really, really strong game. And I'd heard people, criticizing him previously in previous games about him getting beat in pass coverage. I'm sitting there going, Arthur Mollett, that's not his strong suit. His strong suit is playing inside the box and being that big nickel slot guy that can rush the quarterback, that can make plays in the run game. That is his bread and butter, as it was Mike Hilton's bread and butter. And Mike Hilton really excelled in those plays. Now, can Mike Hilton make a play in coverage here and there? Yeah, but it was rare. More often than not, he was expected to make a play against the run, going after the quarterback or doing something near the line of scrimmage. That was really his strong suit. I think that's Arthur Mollett's strong suit. And yesterday might have been one of the few days where I didn't put out that Arthur Mollett yeoman's work tweet, because I usually put out one a game.
That is your thing.
There's guys that like continuously in my book do yeoman's work. Arthur Mollett's one. Chris Wormley is one. Those guys, they just continue to do yeoman's work. And I feel like Mollett's one of those guys. So, I think he was just a little bit short of 2 stars, but he definitely got a 1-star worth of yeoman's work last night.
I'm with you there. Again, playing to his strength is the key. That's why my post game show from the Bengals game was about the defensive game plan the Steelers went in with, because they didn't protect him and other role players in the Steelers enough. But let's get to the 2-star guys, because I know there's some people are thinking out there, what about this guy? I had 3 guys that made 2 stars. As we said before, Mason Cole, I thought he was huge in this game, settling everything down. But I had 2 guys on defense that get 2 stars, and that's Alex Highsmith and James Pierre. Highsmith, I thought, was good against the run for most of the game when it was going his way, but especially in that fourth quarter when they needed him to step up, he gets a sack that produced that sets the Colts back. It forces Matt Ryan to have to make a play on second down to make it third and manageable. On third down, he even said after the game he read what the formation that the Colts had and saw the tight end was going to try to cut him off. He beat him to the punch, brings down Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, forces a 4th down. And on 4th down, the Colts dialed up a pick play where they had an open man, but Matt Ryan couldn't get it to him because Alex Highsmith was walking his man into Matt Ryan, and Ryan had to kind of step away and throw the ball late, which allowed for the Steelers to get in position and break the pass up. I thought that he played a very important game. He now has 10 sacks on the season. Josh, what's been your read on what's made Alex Highsmith very good this year?
I think just the fact that he's able to adapt, he's able to learn. And I thought that play you mentioned where, he's able to read what's going to happen. He can see the formation and know what's coming about. And that's really one of those things where you're studying film, you're leaning on other guys for understanding of what to talk about. And TJ Watt talked about it from the time Alex Highsmith got to Pittsburgh from Charlotte after he got drafted. He said he followed TJ Watt around. He asked him questions. He wanted to know how he did this and how he did that. And what do you look for here? And I think all that stuff is really important, not to mention the fact I think Alex Highsmith is incredibly intelligent.
Oh, absolutely.
Got to just talk to him face to face, like outside of, the locker room and game setting, and just got a one-on-one, had a couple of discussions with him. And it's apparent to me, it's pretty obvious to me that Alex Highsmith is a guy who likes to, understand what he's walking into and looking at it from every single angle. Okay, what happens if I do this? What do I do if this goes down? And you can see that growth and maturation. I love how people like to throw Alex Highsmith is only doing this because TJ Watt's back. And I'm sitting there going, first of all, no, because that's not true. Second of all, if TJ Watt is going to garner that much attention, which he does, because when you're a defending defensive player of the year, that's what happens. Don't you want a guy that can do on the other side things that are similar to what the guy who's garnering all the attention does? That's what Alex Highsmith does. When everybody is focusing on TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith shows up and makes the play that TJ Watt would make. And he made a few of them last night. You detailed them. Those are usually plays that TJ Watt makes.
Yep.
But when TJ Watt is garnering that much attention and so much attention is being specialized towards trying to slow him down. Someone else has to fill in the gap. I'm not going to sit here and penalize Alex Highsmith for being the guy to step in and fill in the gap when TJ Watt just demands that much attention. And you're right. I think the fact that this guy has 10 sacks and doesn't really get talked about enough, it's baffling. And yes, okay, fine. He plays opposite TJ Watt. There was a time when having two really good guys on the edge was considered a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis was considered a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Joe Klecko and Mark Gastineau was considered a good thing. I don't know when that stopped. I remember, if we want to keep it to a Steelers reference instead of using other teams, I remember when Greg Lloyd and Kevin Green was considered a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So why that stopped being looked at that way, I don't know. Maybe we need to ask the people that are saying these things, because clearly odds are there's something else they're trying to get at, and it just messes up their whole mindset. When you have your other all-world player, which is what TJ Watt's pretty much been since he stepped in the door. Let's not kid ourselves. When you got a guy like Highsmith that can come in and adapt to that kind of, not necessarily race to that talent level, but adapt to doing the things that the guy at that talent level does and trying to replicate them in certain spots, none of that is bad. That's always a good thing. I'm never going to say no to that. And there are people that kind of question and you're poo-pooing, and I'm sitting there going, either this is messing up the thing that you always wanted to say and you just don't want to change your mind, or you just like being miserable, because I can't understand it.
No, I agree with you there. One thing I forgot to say with my 1-star grade of Devin Bush, he was targeted 5 times in this game, allowed 4 receptions, but those receptions totaled for 15 yards. That means he gave up less than 4 yards per reception when he was targeted. That's also a very good day for him. But I'll also go with this. My 2-star guy that we didn't get to talk about here, and we got to do briefly because we're over on time right now, Josh. But James Pierre, I gave a 2-star performance. He had a big interception to start this game where he read what Matt Ryan was doing, jumped in front of the pass, made the interception. Such a huge play. And then the rest of the game, he was only targeted 1 time. And it was the touchdown pass. And yes, that was rough, but I felt like he got pushed up on, and that was kind of a tough situation. But for the rest of the game, Matt Ryan didn't go back that way. And if you're doing that as the corner coming off the bench to kind of replace several guys who should be lining up on the outside because of injury or for whatever other reasons, that's a really good game. You played a really solid game. And I give James Pierre a lot of credit for what he did in this game.
I'm waiting to see in the next 24 to 36 hours the tweet from Tony Serino thanking you for giving James Pierre 2 stars, because it's coming. It's coming.
I know Tony, you better give me credit, bro.
Yeah, because Tony, he's the president of the James Pierre fan club, so I'm sure he'll love that.
CEO, the chairman, all of that.
No, but to your point, you're absolutely right. And James Pierre is another guy who gets picked on a lot for what he's not. But for what he's not, he looked a lot better than what he wasn't yesterday. I think he made a lot of plays. And that interception, I know, it's going to come off as like, oh, he just stepped in front of the ball and made a catch. That was not an easy catch to make, especially going to the ground and maintaining possession of it. And we've seen this team drop easier interception opportunities. By the way, they're second in the league in interceptions, and it doesn't get talked about a lot.
It doesn't.
I wanted to throw that in there. But James Pierre making the play that he made yesterday, I thought that was huge. And it comes right back around to what we've been talking about, Chris. A lot of times, the best thing you could have happen to give your offense a spark is your defense getting a turnover. And he got that one early in the game when this thing was, I won't say it was able to go in any other direction, but it was a time to help push that game in their favor. And they could have done a lot more to really get ahead earlier. And James Pierre's interception was an opportunity to do that. So, yeah, I agree with the way he played. And you're right. The touchdown play, it did look bad on him. But here's the thing. When James Pierre and Cam Sutton are largely not targeted for the larger part of a game, and in Cam Sutton's case, the latter part of a game, that means they did a really good job in coverage. And when you're not hearing their names called, that means they're doing a pretty good job of keeping guys quiet. And it's one of those things that's not going to show up on the stat sheet. You're not going to hear it a lot from a play-by-play announcer because they're not looking in that direction. They're following where the ball goes. And unless an analyst sees it, a color analyst is actually looking for that, they might not talk about it either. So those are all things that, that kind of describe why that's so important, even though it's largely unheralded in the moment.
Absolutely. We got a lot more coming this week. We got crossover Thursday tomorrow with Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. John Harner back on the Friday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast, so stick with us. Josh, thank you so much for joining this show. Follow him on Twitter at Josh Taylor HD. You can also check him out on 93.7 The Fan and KDK TV. Thanks so much for joining us, Josh. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics. We got a lot more coming your way right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Like the video if you saw it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. Be back Thursday for a crossover episode, getting you ready for Steelers Falcons this weekend.